Commander Veltar stared at the glowing reports floating in front of him, his alien face twisted with annoyance. For 3 weeks, his scouts had been sending back data about a small blue planet called Earth, and nothing made sense. The information kept contradicting itself, and frankly, it was giving him a headache. The holographic image of Scout Captain Nixara flickered to life in the command room. She looked tired, like she'd been awake for days studying something that bothered her deeply. "Commander, the species on this world calls themselves humans," she began, her voice carrying a strange mix of fascination and concern. "At first glance, they're nothing special. Their technology is primitive. They've barely figured out how to leave their own atmosphere. Their fastest ships would take centuries to reach even the nearest star. By all accounts, they should be an easy conquest." Veltar's tentacles, which hung from his head like thick cables, started twitching impatiently. He'd conquered dozens of worlds, and the pattern was always the same. Find a primitive species, show them superior firepower, accept their surrender, and move on to the next target. This should be simple. "But here's what doesn't make sense, sir," Nixara continued, manipulating the hologram to show images of Earth. "Their planet is trying to kill them constantly, and they love it." The display shifted to show massive storms swirling across Earth's surface, hurricanes that could flatten entire cities, tornadoes that could lift houses into the air like toys. Then came images of the ground itself splitting open during earthquakes, fountains exploding with lava, and waves taller than imperial buildings crashing against coastlines. "These storms would destroy our colonies," Nixara explained. "The seismic activity alone would force us to abandon any settlement attempts. And the weather patterns are so extreme that our environmental suits would be necessary just to survive." Veltar leaned forward, studying the images more carefully. "So the planet is hostile. Many worlds are. What makes this different?" "Watch this, sir." The hologram changed to show humans in action. There was a human riding on top of a massive wave, balancing on a small board as water crashed around him. Another human was hanging from a cliff face by just his fingertips, climbing what looked like a vertical wall of rock. A group of humans were running through a landscape covered in snow and ice, wearing minimal clothing, their breath visible in the freezing air. "They're not just surviving these conditions, Commander. They're enjoying them. They do these things for fun." Veltar's other officers gathered around the display, murmuring among themselves. This was unusual behavior, even for a primitive species. "There's more, sir," Nixara said, her voice growing more serious. "We documented their wildlife. They share their planet with creatures that could kill our best warriors." The display showed massive predators, sharks with teeth like knives, bears that stood 3 times the height of a human, cats with claws that could tear through metal. "And yet," she continued, "humans hunt these creatures, not out of necessity but for sport. We observed a human named Min Wu, who tracked and killed a predator twice his size using nothing but primitive weapons and his knowledge of the terrain." The room fell silent. The Imperial forces were used to dealing with civilized species that had evolved past their violent instincts. These humans seemed to embrace violence as a natural part of life. "But what concerns me most, Commander, is how they fight each other." The hologram shifted to show scenes of human warfare. "They've been in continuous conflict for their entire recorded history, not just occasional territorial disputes, but constant evolving warfare that has pushed their tactical thinking to extraordinary levels." Images flashed by showing human battles throughout history, from primitive spear fighting to massive mechanized conflicts involving millions of soldiers. Each era showed increasing sophistication in both technology and strategy. "We studied one particular conflict," Nixara said. "A human soldier named Hyun Woo led a small unit that was completely surrounded by enemy forces. They held their position for 6 months, creating weapons from scrap metal, eating food that would poison most Imperial species, and using tactics that changed daily based on their situation. When rescue finally arrived, they had not only survived but had gained ground against superior numbers. The human Hyunwoo had turned his desperate situation into a strategic advantage. Admiral Kethron, who had been listening from his command station, finally spoke up. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. "Captain Nixara, You're describing primitive savages on a backwater world. Yes, they're aggressive, but aggression without advanced technology is meaningless. We've conquered over 1,000 species, many far more advanced than these humans. He gestured dismissively at the hologram. Their biggest weapons are crude nuclear devices that would barely scratch our ship hulls. Their fastest communication travels at light speed, which we surpassed millennia ago. They haven't even figured out basic energy shields or faster-than-light travel. The Admiral's confidence was infectious. Several officers nodded in agreement. After all, they had the most advanced military in known space. What could a primitive species possibly do against energy weapons, force fields, and ships that could cross galaxies in days? Sir, Nixara tried to interrupt, with all respect, I believe we should approach this more carefully. These humans have characteristics we've never encountered before. Their adaptability, their willingness to fight impossible odds, their ability to thrive in conditions that would kill us. I think we're underestimating them. Your concerns are noted, Captain, Admiral Kethron said firmly, but they're rejected. We'll use the standard occupation protocol. 3 dreadnoughts, 50 escort ships, and enough ground forces to secure their major population centers. The humans will surrender within days, just like every other species we've encountered. But sir, what if they don't surrender? Admiral Kethron smiled, showing teeth that gleamed like polished metal. Then we'll remind them why surrender is their only option. Prepare the fleet, Captain. We move in one standard cycle. The holographic image of Nixara flickered and disappeared, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy with unspoken worry. As the command staff began preparing for what they assumed would be another routine conquest, none of them realized they were about to make the biggest mistake in Imperial history. They were about to wake up Earth. The massive Imperial warships dropped out of hyperspace like thunder rolling across the sky. 3 enormous dreadnoughts, each one longer than 10 city blocks, appeared above Earth's atmosphere. Their dark hulls blocked out portions of sunlight as they moved into position, casting giant shadows across continents below. Admiral Kethron stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, feeling satisfied with himself. Through the massive viewing windows, he could see the small blue and green planet spinning slowly beneath his fleet. It looked so peaceful, so helpless. This would be over quickly. Beautiful, isn't it? He said to his officers, gesturing toward Earth, another primitive world about to join the Empire. Their descendants will thank us for bringing them civilization. His bridge crew bustled around their stations, checking weapons systems and communication arrays. Everything was proceeding exactly as it had on hundreds of other conquests. The A pattern never changed. Arrive with overwhelming force, demand surrender, accept submission, and move on to the next target. Sir, all ships report ready, announced his communications officer, Pillock. Shall we begin the standard protocol? Indeed. Open channels to the planet's surface. Broadcast on all frequencies. Kethron straightened his uniform and put on his most authoritative voice. Let's get this over with. The message went out across Earth in dozens of human languages, automatically translated by Imperial computers. The words echoed in government buildings, military bases, and homes across the planet. Inhabitants of Earth, you are now subjects of the Corvani Empire. Lay down your weapons and prepare for integration into civilized society. Resistance is futile and will only result in unnecessary casualties. Kethron expected what always happened next. Silence followed by desperate attempts to negotiate, then eventual surrender. Instead, the response came back almost immediately, crackling, through the communication system with startling clarity. This is Major Sujin of the Earth Defense Coalition, said a young woman's voice, speaking in accented but clear Galactic standard. Her tone was steady, almost casual. We've received your message loud and clear. Here's our response. Go to hell. The bridge fell silent. Officers looked at each other in confusion. In over 30 years of conquest, no species had ever responded with such immediate defiance. Did she just... began Navigation Officer Zeklan. She did, Kethron replied, his face darkening. How amusing. The primitives think they can alarms started blaring across the bridge. Red warning lights flashed as the tactical displays lit up with incoming threats. "Sir," shouted Weapons Officer Thymos, "we're taking fire. Multiple launch points across the planet's surface." Kethron spun around to stare at the tactical screen. Dozens of projectiles were streaking up from Earth, primitive kinetic weapons and nuclear missiles that shouldn't have been able to reach his fleet's altitude. But somehow, they were not. Only reaching the Imperial ships, they were hitting them with disturbing accuracy. "Impossible," whispered Zeklan, studying his readings. "Their technology shouldn't be capable of tracking our ships at this range. Our stealth systems should make us nearly invisible to their sensors. The impacts weren't doing serious damage. The Imperial shields were far too advanced for such primitive weapons. But the fact that the humans could target them at all was deeply troubling. They were ready for us," Kethron realized, his confidence beginning to crack. "They knew we were coming." More disturbing reports flooded in from across the fleet. The humans weren't just firing randomly. They were coordinating their attacks, focusing on specific ship systems, and somehow they had calculated the exact positions of every Imperial vessel despite their advanced cloaking technology. "Show them what real power looks like," Kethron snarled, his patience exhausted. "Target their largest military installation, full power, the main cannon of the Eternal." Dominion began charging, energy building up until the entire ship hummed with barely contained power. The weapon fired, sending a beam of pure energy down toward Earth that could have vaporized a small moon. The beam struck a human naval base on the Pacific coast. The entire facility disappeared in a flash of superheated plasma, leaving nothing but a crater of molten glass where buildings had stood moments before. "That should convince them," Kethron said with satisfaction. "Now they'll understand what they're dealing with." But instead of the expected panic and surrender broadcasts, something else happened. The response was immediate, coordinated and completely unexpected. Nuclear warheads began detonating around the Imperial fleet, not direct hits, but carefully calculated explosions that created electromagnetic pulses and radiation bursts. The blasts weren't powerful enough to penetrate Imperial shields, but they were perfectly positioned to disrupt communication systems and sensor arrays. "Sir, we're losing contact with the outer escorts," Pilek reported, his voice rising with panic. "The humans somehow calculated the exact yield needed to interfere with our systems without triggering our automatic retaliation protocols." "How? Is that possible?" Kethron demanded. "They shouldn't understand our technology well enough to—" "Sir," interrupted Intelligence Officer Kairan, "we're detecting massive mobilization across all human continents. Military units are moving to positions, civilian populations are being evacuated to hardened shelters, and their communication networks are buzzing with activity." The tactical display showed a planet transforming itself in real time. What had looked like a peaceful, primitive world just hours ago was now revealing itself to be something entirely different. Hidden military installations were coming online, underground facilities were opening up, and weapons systems that hadn't shown up on their initial scans were suddenly active. "They're not surrendering," Kairan continued, her voice filled with disbelief. "They're preparing for war." But the most shocking development came next. Human salvage teams were already moving toward the debris from damaged Imperial scout ships, and within hours, something impossible happened. A broadcast came. From the planet's surface, originating from what looked like a hastily constructed laboratory. A young human man named Jin Ho appeared on screen, holding what was unmistakably an Imperial energy weapon, except it had been completely rebuilt using human components. "Greetings, Imperial forces," Jin Ho said cheerfully, as if he was demonstrating a science project. "Thank you for the technology samples. We've made some improvements." He fired the weapon, which produced a beam noticeably more powerful than the original Imperial version. The broadcast continued as Jin Ho's team showed off other reverse-engineered devices, shield generators, communication systems, and propulsion. "Units all rebuilt and enhanced using human engineering principles. How is this possible?" Kethron whispered, staring at the screen in horror. "They've had our technology for less than 6 hours. It should take years to understand even the basic principles." Around him, his officers scrambled to make sense of what they were seeing. Every assumption they'd made about human capabilities was proving wrong. These weren't primitive savages waiting to be conquered. They were something the Empire had never encountered before. "Sir," Pilek said quietly. "I think we may have made a mistake." As more reports came in of human forces, adapting, learning, and fighting back with increasing effectiveness, Admiral Kethron began to realize that what was supposed to be a simple conquest had just become something else entirely. The humans weren't just resisting, they were treating the invasion like a challenge to overcome, and they seemed to be enjoying it. Admiral Kethron hadn't slept properly in weeks. Dark circles ringed his alien eyes as he paced the bridge of his flagship, watching reports flood in from across the planet below. What was supposed to be a quick, clean conquest had turned into a nightmare that seemed to get worse every single day. 3 months ago he had been confident, even arrogant. His massive fleet had dropped out of hyperspace, expecting to find frightened primitives ready to surrender at the first show of force. Instead, he had found something that defied everything the Empire knew about warfare, technology, and survival. The humans weren't just resisting, they were evolving. "Give me the morning status report," Kethron said wearily to his staff, though he dreaded what he was about to hear. Ground Commander Thylex stepped forward, his usually pristine uniform now stained and wrinkled. The stress of the past 3 months showed on every Imperial officer's face. "Sir, the situation continues to deteriorate across all fronts." The holographic display activated, showing a map of Earth with red zones indicating areas of human resistance. The red covered almost everything. "Our landing parties are facing coordinated resistance in every sector," Thylex continued. "Yesterday, human forces led by Colonel Minho completely destroyed our main supply depot in the Pacific region. But here's what's truly disturbing, sir. They didn't use any advanced weapons." Kethron looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "They used modified mining equipment, sir. Drilling machines converted into weapons, construction vehicles turned into assault platforms, and power sources jury-rigged from captured Imperial energy cells. But the most incredible part was their timing." Thylex manipulated the display to show seismic readings. "They attacked during an active volcanic eruption, using the lava flows as cover to approach our position undetected." "During a volcanic eruption?" Kethron's voice cracked with disbelief. "That should have killed them." "That's what we thought too, sir. But somehow they wore protective gear made from salvaged materials and moved through conditions that would require our most advanced environmental suits. When our sensors couldn't track them through the heat and ash, they struck with perfect coordination." Another officer, communications specialist Pilek, raised his hand nervously. "Sir, the Sol sector report is even more troubling." "Go ahead," Kethron said, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear it. "Captain Boram has organized what appears to be a civilian resistance network that spans the entire continent. But, sir, they're not using professional soldiers. They're using everyone." Pilek's voice trembled slightly. "Children as young as 10 are serving as scouts and messengers, moving through areas we've secured and somehow staying invisible to our detection systems." "Children?" Kethron felt sick. In all his years of conquest, he had never faced an enemy that involved their young in warfare. "Yes, sir. And elderly humans, some over 80 years old, are working as engineers and technicians, building devices we can't even identify. Yesterday, a human teenager named Tae Jin disabled one of our walker mechs using nothing but materials he found in abandoned buildings. A device built from what humans call household items somehow overloaded a power core that cost us 10 million Imperial credits." The room fell silent except for the hum of ship systems. Kethron felt a cold dread creeping up his spine. "How many ships have we lost?" Intelligence Officer Kairan stepped forward with a data pad that seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds in her hands. 17 escort vessels, 3 heavy cruisers, and yesterday we lost the dreadnought Iron Resolve." Gasps echoed around the bridge. Losing a dreadnought was almost unthinkable. These massive ships were designed to single-handedly conquer entire star systems. "How?" Kethron whispered. "Sergeant Yuna led a squad that somehow captured one of our intact shuttles," Kairan explained. "Within 8 hours, they had not only figured out how to operate it, but had modified it for combat and used it to ram the dreadnought's main reactor housing. The explosion took out half the ship." "But that should have been suicide for them," another officer protested. "It was, sir. They knew they wouldn't survive. But before the attack, Sergeant Yunar broadcast a message saying that one dreadnought was worth 100 human lives, and they considered it a good trade. Kethron sank into his command chair, feeling older than his years, but the reports weren't finished. "Sir, we need to discuss the environmental combat situations," Thylex said reluctantly. "The humans are fighting us in conditions that should be impossible for any life form to survive." The display shifted to show combat footage that seemed like it came from different planets entirely. In one scene, human divers led by someone named Sung Min were attacking Imperial underwater installations, somehow operating at depths that should have crushed their primitive equipment. They moved through the water like they belonged there, using modified weapons that functioned perfectly in aquatic environments. Another scene showed mountain warfare in conditions so cold that Imperial equipment was failing, while humans led by Hai Wan's unit moved through the snow and ice like it was their natural habitat, striking Imperial positions and disappearing into blizzards that blocked all sensors. But the most disturbing footage showed a group led by Kyung-Soo fighting in the vacuum of space itself. They had somehow modified deep-sea diving equipment to work in zero atmosphere, and were conducting boarding actions against Imperial ships using nothing but primitive rocket propulsion and weapons cobbled together from salvaged parts. "How are they doing this?" Kethron asked desperately. "How are they surviving in environments that kill our own troops even with advanced equipment?" "Sir," Kayran said quietly, "I think we fundamentally misunderstood what we were dealing with. These humans didn't just evolve on a habitable planet. They evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill them. Every environmental extreme we can create, they've already survived worse." She manipulated the display to show Earth's climate data. "Their planet regularly experiences temperature swings that would destroy our colonies. Weather patterns that would scatter our fleets are just Tuesday afternoon to them. They've spent their entire evolutionary history adapting to conditions that would require our most advanced technology just to survive." "But sir, there's something else," she continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "They're not just adapting tactically. We think they're adapting biologically. Some of our captured personnel report that humans working near Imperial energy sources are showing enhanced physical capabilities, improved reflexes, better night vision, increased strength and endurance." "That's impossible," Kethron said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it, sir? We've been pumping exotic radiation and energy fields into their environment for 3 months. If these humans are as adaptable as they appear to be..." Through the viewport, Kethron could see small human fighters streaking past his flagship. But they weren't just human ships anymore. They were hybrid vessels combining captured Imperial technology with human engineering in ways that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did. The ships moved with an aggressiveness and unpredictability that his trained pilots couldn't match. "Sir," Kayran said softly, "we need to consider withdrawal. These aren't primitive savages we're fighting. They're something we've never encountered in the galaxy. Every challenge we present to them, every obstacle we put in their way, they treat as..." She struggled for the right word. "As entertainment," she finally said. "They're enjoying this fight, sir, and they're getting better at it every day." Kethron stared out at the blue planet below, realizing with growing horror that somewhere along the way, the hunters had become the hunted. Dr. Na Young wiped the sweat from her forehead as she stepped back to admire her latest creation, the Mahdi. Laboratory around her looked like a mad scientist's workshop crossed with an alien junkyard. Pieces of Imperial technology covered every surface, energy cores humming with strange light, metal alloys that seemed to bend in impossible ways, and computer systems that operated on principles human science was only beginning to understand. But what made her smile wasn't the alien tech itself. It was what her team had done with it. "General Jae-hyun, are you seeing this?" she said into her communication device, holding up a device that looked like someone had surgically combined an Imperial shield generator with a car battery and some copper wiring. The general's voice crackled through the speaker. "I'm seeing it, Doctor, but I'm not sure I believe it. Are you telling me that thing actually works?" "Better than works," Young laughed, activating the device. A shimmering energy field appeared around her workbench, deflecting a test projectile with ease. We've improved their shield efficiency by 30%, just by applying basic thermodynamics principles that any first-year engineering student would understand. She gestured around the lab where dozens of other scientists were tinkering with Imperial components. The funny thing is, these aliens are incredibly advanced, but they're not innovative. They build things one way and never question if there might be a better approach. We've been improving on their designs faster than they can deploy new countermeasures. How's the timeline looking for our new fleet? General Jae-hyun asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone coordinating a global resistance effort. Na-young glanced across the lab where Dongwoo was putting the finishing touches on what looked like a fighter craft that had been built in someone's garage. Except this garage-built ship was incorporating technology that most galactic civilizations would consider impossibly advanced. Dongwoo's engineering team has our first squadron ready for combat trials, she reported. We've got 12 hybrid fighters that can outmaneuver anything the Empire has thrown at us so far. She paused to watch Mi-young, a young physicist who had been working around the clock to understand Imperial faster-than-light travel. And you're going to love this. Mi-young cracked their hyperdrive technology yesterday. Turns out their method is remarkably similar to theoretical work we abandoned back in 2089 because we thought it was too dangerous to attempt. Too dangerous for who? The general asked, with what sounded like amusement. Apparently, too dangerous for species that didn't evolve on a planet that regularly tries to kill them, Na-young replied. We're already building our first prototype hyperdrive. Chan-ho's weapons division has also created something special that I think will surprise our Imperial friends. Through her laboratory window, she could see something that would have seemed impossible just 6 months ago. Human children were playing in what remained of an Imperial landing craft, treating pieces of advanced alien technology like building blocks. They moved among energy cores and quantum processors with the casual familiarity of kids playing with toys. General, you should see this, she said, pointing her camera toward the window. 10-year-old Yejin was trying to charge her tablet using Imperial power cells yesterday. She accidentally created a new form of energy storage that our best engineers had been trying to develop for years. It wasn't just the children either. Across the compound, teenagers who had grown up during the occupation were working alongside seasoned scientists, often coming up with solutions that stumped adults with decades of experience. They approached the alien technology without the preconceptions that limited older researchers. But General, Na-young continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone, there's something else we need to discuss. Something that might be even more significant than our technological advances. She moved to a medical station where she'd been conducting regular health screenings on the research team. The data displayed on her screens would have seemed like science fiction just months ago. We're changing, she said quietly. Not just technologically, biologically. Extended exposure to Imperial radiation and energy fields is triggering adaptive mutations in human beings. What kind of changes? The general asked, his voice sharp with concern. Subin's reconnaissance team has been working near Imperial energy cores for 2 months, Na-young explained, pulling up medical scans. They're showing dramatically enhanced night vision, better than any night vision equipment we've ever produced. Chan-ho's Rapid Response Squad has developed reflexes and reaction times that are off the charts. Some of them are reacting to threats faster than our computers can process the same information. She moved to the window again, watching a group of teenage soldiers led by Si-young practicing combat maneuvers in the courtyard below. They moved with a fluid coordination that seemed almost supernatural, wielding weapons that hadn't existed 6 months ago with the confidence of experienced veterans. It's like the occupation is accelerating our evolution, she mused. The Empire's presence isn't just giving us access to their technology. It's triggering biological adaptations that are making us stronger, faster, and more capable of surviving in the conditions their technology creates. The implications were staggering. Human beings were literally adapting to fight a galactic empire, developing capabilities that would allow them to survive and thrive in environments across the galaxy. So you know what I think happened, Na-young said, leaning back against her workbench. The Empire made a critical error in judgment. They looked at Earth and saw a primitive world with a young species that should have been easy to conquer. She gestured toward the data streaming across her screens. Biological adaptations, technological innovations, tactical evolutions happening in real time. But they should have asked themselves a different question. What kind of species survives and thrives on a planet that's constantly trying to kill them? What kind of evolutionary pressure creates beings who treat natural disasters as minor inconveniences and predators as interesting challenges? Through her laboratory speakers, she could hear reports coming in from resistance cells across the globe. Human forces were not just holding their ground against a galactic empire. They were learning, adapting, and preparing to take the fight beyond Earth's atmosphere. Her communication device buzzed with an incoming priority message from Wu Jin's Space Reconnaissance Unit. His voice was excited, almost breathless. "Dr. Na Young, you need to see this immediately. We've been tracking Imperial communication patterns and supply routes. We've located their home worlds." Na Young felt a cold smile spread across her face. The resistance was about to become something else entirely. "Send me the coordinates," she said. "It's time to show the Empire what happens when you try to cage Earth's children." Around her, the laboratory hummed with activity as humans continued doing what they did best, adapting, innovating, and preparing to overcome whatever challenge came next. The Empire had awakened something they didn't understand, and now that something was getting ready to visit them at home. Admiral Kethron looked like he had aged 20 years in the past 6 months. His once pristine uniform was wrinkled, his usually perfect posture had collapsed into a defeated slouch, and his eyes held the hollow stare of someone who had watched their entire world crumble around them. The command bridge of his flagship felt like a tomb. Officers moved quietly, speaking in hushed whispers as they processed reports that seemed to grow more impossible with each passing day. What had started as a routine conquest of a primitive world had somehow transformed into the Empire's worst nightmare. "Sir," Communications Officer Pilek said softly, approaching the Admiral's chair with a datapad that trembled in his hands. "We've received another report from the Outer Territories." Kethron didn't look up from the tactical display that showed his Empire slowly bleeding red. "Go ahead," he said in a voice that sounded like it belonged to a much older, much more broken man. "Nexus Station, sir. The humans arrived 3 cycles ago." Pilek paused, as if the words themselves were hard to speak. The station surrendered, without firing a single shot. For a moment, Kethron said nothing. Nexus Station was one of the Empire's most heavily fortified positions, a massive military installation that controlled access to 7 different star systems. It had enough firepower to destroy entire fleets and was defended by some of the Empire's best troops. "Surrendered," Kethron's voice cracked like breaking glass. "A military installation with 10,000 personnel and enough weapons to level planets surrendered to primitives." "Sir, they're not primitive anymore," Pilek replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Captain Inwu of the human vessel, Soul's Vengeance transmitted a message to all Imperial forces in the sector. The humans are offering protection to any species that has been oppressed by the Empire. They're calling themselves the Liberation Fleet." Kethron finally looked up at the tactical display, and what he saw there made his blood run cold. Red markers were spreading across the galaxy like some kind of infection, each one representing a world that had either fallen to human forces or had voluntarily joined their cause. But it wasn't just the number of worlds that terrified him. It was how fast it was happening. Human ships, built from some impossible combination of stolen Imperial technology and Earth engineering, were appearing in systems across known space. They moved with a speed and coordination that defied everything the Empire knew about warfare. "How many ships do they have now?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Intelligence Officer Kayran stepped forward with her own datapad, her face pale. "Our best estimates suggest they've constructed over 300 vessels of various sizes, sir. But that's not the worst part." She manipulated the tactical display to show ship movement patterns across the galaxy. "They're not just fighting us with their own forces. They're sharing everything: technology, combat techniques, survival methods, adaptive strategies. Species that have been conquered and controlled for centuries are suddenly mounting successful rebellions using human tactics." The display showed the impossible. Worlds that had been under Imperial control for generations were suddenly throwing off their chains, using weapons and strategies that looked distinctly human in origin. "Sir," Ground Commander Thylek said quietly, There's something else you need to know. Do you remember the human prisoner Jiwoo who escaped from detention block 7 last month? Ketheron nodded grimly. The escape had been embarrassing enough. A single human had somehow broken out of what was supposed to be an escape-proof facility, taking 12 other prisoners with her. We've been monitoring her activities, Thylex continued. She's been traveling from world to world, teaching what she calls Earth survival training to other species. Entire planetary populations are learning to fight the way humans fight. What does that mean exactly? Ketheron asked, though he suspected he already knew. She's teaching them to use their environments as weapons, sir, to adapt quickly to changing circumstances, to improvise with whatever materials are available, to treat every setback as a learning opportunity rather than a defeat. Thylex pulled up footage from various worlds, showing alien species employing distinctly human-style tactics. They're learning to think like humans, sir, and it's working. Ketheron stared at the tactical display as more red markers appeared. In real time, each one represented another defeat, another world lost, another step toward the complete collapse of an empire that had stood for thousands of years. How did this happen? He whispered to himself, but his question was answered by an intercepted human transmission that began broadcasting across all Imperial frequencies. The voice belonged to Captain Seung Ho of the human exploration vessel Indomitable, and his words cut through the silence of the bridge like a blade. "Citizens of the galaxy," the human said, his voice carrying a confidence that made Ketheron's officers flinch. "The Corvani Empire wants you to believe that resistance is futile, that their technology and numbers make them invincible. We're here to tell you that's a lie." The transmission continued as images of human victories flashed across screens throughout the Imperial fleet. The Empire made one critical mistake when they came to Earth. They thought we were just another world to conquer, another primitive species to add to their collection. They didn't understand what Earth really is. Ketheron found himself leaning forward, listening to words that explained his own defeat. Earth isn't our home because it's safe or comfortable. Earth is our home because surviving it made us strong. Every natural disaster, every predator, every environmental extreme taught us that there's no challenge that can't be overcome with enough determination and creativity. The human's voice grew stronger, more passionate. Now we're sharing that strength with everyone the Empire has oppressed. We're teaching you that their advanced technology means nothing if you're willing to adapt and fight smarter. We're showing you that numbers don't matter when you have something worth fighting. For iced. Around the bridge, Imperial officers stood frozen, listening to their own doom being broadcast across the galaxy. The Empire's greatest weakness is that they've never had to struggle for anything. They've never had to innovate under pressure, never had to turn disadvantages into advantages, never had to fight for their very survival. We have, and now we're going to teach that lesson to everyone. As the transmission ended, Ketheron watched his tactical display light up with new rebellions, new human fleet movements, new worlds declaring independence from Imperial rule. "Sir," Pylex said softly, "Fleet Command is ordering all remaining forces to retreat to the core worlds for a final defensive stand." Ketheron nodded slowly, understanding that he was witnessing the end of an era. The Empire had ruled the galaxy through superior technology and overwhelming force for thousands of years. But they had never faced an enemy that treated their advantages as puzzles to solve rather than obstacles to fear. "Send the order," he said quietly. "All ships withdraw to Imperial core space." As his fleet began its retreat, Ketheron realized the terrible truth. They hadn't just failed to conquer a primitive world. They had awakened something that viewed the entire hostile galaxy as simply another environment to master, another challenge to overcome. The humans were no longer trapped on their death world. The death world had trained them for the universe, and now the universe was about to learn what that meant.